something we totally did not expect at all. So that could happen if you want it to happen. Christine, I'm looking at you. So I'm very, very happy to introduce our guest tonight, Paola Corso, who I've known for, God Almighty, a long time. We were children. We were children in New York City, attending open mics and things like that. She's the author of 7 poetry and fiction books set in her native Pittsburgh, where her Southern Italian immigrant family worked in the steel mills. Her books include The Laundress Catches Her Breath, winner of the Tilly Olson Award in Creative Writing, Once I Was Told the Air Was Not for Breathing, winner of a Triangle Fire Memorial Association Award, and Katina's Haircut, a novel in stories. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Christian Science Monitor, Women's Review of Books, Writer's Digest, U.S. Catholic, The Progressive, and numerous anthologies. Her writing honors include a New York Foundation for the Arts Poetry Fellowship, Sherwood Anderson Fiction Prize, and inclusion of Pennsylvania Center of the Book's Cultural and Literary Map. She is like a quadruple threat. She's also a photographer and recently an artist model, but we'll talk about that later. And she is, okay, and then the rest, yeah. And she kind of divides her time between New York and Pittsburgh. She has kid in school in Brooklyn, and heart in Pittsburgh, I think.
Oh, you bet.
Okay. Hello, everybody.
Thank you, George. Can you hear me without the microphone, or would you prefer that I have the microphone? Probably prefer, or because I can shout. So I would like to lead this reading, since it is about Pittsburgh. I'm from Pittsburgh. We even have GS here in the audience, who is a Pittsburgher. And I like to start these readings with what I call my Pittsburgh prayer. GS, are you going to join me? And everybody, you'll get it as soon as I start. Everybody, please join me. In the name of the Allegheny and of the Monongahela and the Holy Ohio, amen. Okay. You might have some rivers up here, but GS and I know there's nothing like the confluence. Nothing like the confluence. George, you were just at the point, and you know it's really special. Okay. All right. So I'm going to read about my family, working class family. There's some poems here about working lives and industry and pollution, etc. But first, I want to show this video, because what makes Pittsburgh really distinctive, and GS and I were just talking about it, because he said he likes coming down from Geneva down here because there are hills. And Pittsburgh is full of hills and valleys. And as a result, when the mills were built and they were right along the riverbank, they took up the flatlands. And so the workers had to live up in the hills. And the first form of public transportation for these steel workers, factory workers, up the hill to get down to the riverbank was public stairways. Pittsburgh has more city steps than any other in the country. It depends on who you talk to, but there's over 800. Okay. So beat San Francisco, that's not an easy thing to do, is it? If you've been there, it's a very hilly city. So Freudian slip there. So I want to show this video, and gives you a little sense of my connection with city steps.
Can we add, if anybody has a secret for getting the full screen on YouTube, we're all ears. Totally all ears.
Bottom right corner of the square box, right. There's a little expansion button.
Right here?
Above that. Slightly above. Yeah, right there. It should be.
Yeah.
It's expanding, but it's only expanding to that size. Apparently, it doesn't like
Yeah,
this.
the computer.
That would be decent.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Let's see if
See what we get. Well,
My Pittsburgh childhood, the hills where we.
Wait, you're cut off.
Yeah, I know.
Right? Oh, no, okay, there we go. Got it.
But there should be a visual here. We lived. The river valley where my Southern Italian immigrant family worked, in a steel mill, glass plant, and the mirror works along the Allegheny. My name is Paola Corso. I'm a poet and a fiction writer whose books are set in my native Pittsburgh, where my Southern Italian immigrant family worked in the steel mills. I'm also a co-founder with poet and translator Andrew Edwards of Step and Stanzas. It is a poetry and a performance project that celebrates city steps, our distinctive history, unique geography, and wonderful diversity. When I moved back to the area with my two sons, we wanted to do something distinctively Pittsburgh. So we participated in a step cleanup. And I looked up and I saw a landing and I said, this isn't a landing, this is a stage. I saw the steps and thought, these are really stadium seats. And there could be poets and artists and dancers and musicians on these steps performing for people in the community to celebrate our environment, our sense of place, and our community and what we hold in common, because steps connect neighborhoods as well, as we know. So they bring people together. Then came a day I looked up to the hills and saw what's between. Steps. Pittsburgh is a triangle, a confluence of rivers, but my geometric view of the city began to take a different shape. The perpendicular, where horizontal meets vertical. City steps and steps in the city. People climbing them, sitting on them, shoveling and painting them. Steps to admire for their architectural beauty. Steps my grandfather, a stonemason from Sicily, built. Steps my Calabrian father and grandfather climbed to and from the steel mill. You know, there are those that remember the time when steps, like my grandparents, were using these steps to get down to the mill. That's how it all began, right? These steps were built for the mill workers at the top of the hill where they lived to the riverbank, to the mill. But today, as we know, that has evolved in our post-industrial city. We have people that are climbing these steps because they want to lower their carbon footprint. They want to get out into the environment and look at this as a step master and get their exercise. I interviewed somebody and wrote a poem who was recovering from heart surgery. And so she was had climbed these steps a lot to meditate. She would stop at a monastery and climb them to keep herself physically fit. I think the use will continue to evolve, that we are beyond the time when a worker lived up on the hill and there was a mill that was running at the base. We know that we've passed that period of time, but it's so exciting. I think we're just beginning to really step into our sense of green, appreciating our environment, appreciating these steps, and seeing them for recreational purposes. There's really nothing to hold us back from envisioning these as a park that some cities have done, for example, and planting on these steps, painting them. There's a beautiful mosaic in the South Side that artist put together with the help of the community. These can be canvases, they're stages, they are platforms for expressing our appreciation for our city and this geography, and that these steps were built for a reason, and that's evolving, and that's okay. Steps are vertical bridges, and I want to cross them as connections in the landscape, connections we make with each other, that middle ground where we meet. For the artist, a set of stairs is a set of stairs, and I don't care if they're decrepit or not. They still start at the bottom and they reach up and to the heavens, if you will. So that doesn't change. That doesn't change. Okay.
Very nice, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I am going to read a couple of poems one about my grandfather and his experience, and one about my father and his experience. So let me start with my grandfather, a steelworker. He was a crane operator. Crane Dance in memory of Francesco Antonio Corso. 1. My grandfather's crane spanning fire, long-necked, long-legged, teething molten bone. He rides with a sweatband above his brow, stroking its mechanical head to drop white-hot ingots into a trolley. He rides its flexion and crackled air to machine through night shifting night. 2. My grandfather's crane spanning fire, long-necked, long-legged, teething molten bone, as he becomes one of those predictions of science. In my dream, he doesn't die. I hold 1,000 origami cranes, and he rides in a vim of courtship dance. Pairs of birds whisk their wings and vault the air high above the wintering ground. I refer to science in this poem, and maybe I should have told you beforehand, but I'll tell you now. There was a long-term study done by the University of Pittsburgh, and this was a span of years and a good sample of steel workers, and they tried to understand if there was a connection, a link between exposure to toxins and cancer. And of course, there was a positive correlation. And I have to say, what really struck me, it was like this thick study that I looked at. What really struck me was even the position, where the worker was, whether it was in a crane, above a furnace, what have you, it kind of indicated what type of cancer you would get. And my grandfather died of leukemia, and that was the cancer that a crane operator was prone to get. So he worked at the mill for 47 years and before he retired. So I want to read a follow-up poem to that. It's called A Cigarette Butt on a Landing. Pick it up, toss it in the trash. Pretty up city stairs for an annual trek. Years ago, the same camel would have been flicked by a mill hunk, taking his last drag to be climbed down to the factory gate. What did he care about clean steps when he was a sooty shadow of a man after his shift? Pants and shirt the color of a charcoal sky, the color of factory lungs. Now trekkers climb a yellow brick road for views, for snapshots, for exercise, for a lighter carbon footprint when the bottom of his steel-toe boots was black, his soul heavy. Old-timers climbed steps before they were cool, before they were the destination. They climbed to church and school, to a haircut and soda pop. And a steel worker, steps were the route to punch in and out, the route he didn't want to take except on payday. On my grandfather's last night shift, operating a crane before he retired, my father and his brothers borrowed a Cadillac and drove him home at sunrise. He wasn't going to climb up no stairs on his last day of work after 47 years in a sweat cabin above open fire. He came home to a pancake breakfast, to maple syrup, strips of bacon, black coffee, home, an old destination, home, a new route. I think I need stronger glasses.
Right.
I'm not reading as well as I should because I can't see the words. All righty, this might help a little.
Would you like the lights up?
No, that's not the problem. Thank you, George. Okay, now for a poem about my father. And I read this in memory of him, Mariano Procopio Corso. Snapshot of my father as a young man standing at the top of hillside steps, wearing a double-breasted suit and tie, pants creased, shoes polished, his back to the steel mill in the valley behind him, his back to the jackhammer he used to drill on the labor gang. It's 70 pounds to his 145. The crane he operated in a sweaty cabin above a coal-fired furnace. His back to chain-smoking stacks, to chain-smoking beer gardens, to the jackass work he skipped one day. And when his father found out, he belted him before he told his son, Mario, you better learn to use your head and not your hands. As he wore his white collar's best, striking a pose for the camera, feet anchored on higher ground, my father set his sights ahead. Not at a Pittsburgh mill, not his native Calabria or Santo Procopio, not the patron saint that he was named after for sharing a July 8th birthday. But he signed his middle name Paul instead of Procopio. Not the steps he climbed onto a boat crossing the ocean in steerage herds, steps where his mother led him up by the hand, pushed him through the classroom door each morning because he was a wop who couldn't speak English, a wop who flunked his first grade of school. Steps to a job at the mill after high school, running up, jumping down with the lunch bucket swinging from his hand, punching in on time with the rank and file. Steps to a World War II fighter plane as a tail gunner in the Pacific Theater. Then to college on the GI Bill, the stage to accept his diploma, to a newspaper office, government office, school administration office, suit and tie office. What was my Italian father thinking as he faced his American future, double-breasted for the camera? What he didn't know, couldn't know. He turned his back on an immigrant past, but his cancer faced front. Dead center front. Dead center lungs. This is a follow-up. Meeting with Dr. Deborah Davis, Director of Environmental Oncology. I'll come with questions in a spiral notebook and ask the most important one last. I'll start where the house where my father grew up, by the mill, and air so dirty that his mother was always washing down walls and bleaching curtains. Was it his job as a steel worker until his father told him that he better learn to use his head and not his hands? Or that he mowed the brush behind our backyard near a toxic waste dump? Was it the asbestos in the school where he worked all summer during renovation? Or the secondhand smoke in the bowling alley? Was it the mercury from the power plant that fell on his head when he stood in line at the nearby custard stand to order our root beer floats? Particles so invisible. Some people say we don't need environmental groups. There are no whales to save in Pittsburgh, just our jobless asses. And is it true that this power plant failed to install a scrubber with the county's okay, though it sponsors the city environmental awards? Or that the plumber cursed Rachel Carson when he fixed the pipes at her homestead because she's the reason there aren't jobs in the valley? Or that senior citizen who told our senator that gave an award to an environmental group, "What's a good union boy like you going there for?" Tell me, Dr. Davis, was it just the cigarettes? I want to know if we should tell our mother she doesn't have to hold on to everything like it's evidence, that she can throw out the tablet with his temperature records, put the thermometer back in the medicine cabinet, that we don't need the x-ray of his tumors and we can flush the morphine down the toilet, throw out his life insurance because we know what caused the cancer. Tell me yes or no, despite the fact that the immigrant in my father wouldn't have wanted me to interview you and would have told me what he said so often when I was growing up, that I'm a pain in the ass who doesn't know when to quit, that I should thank you for your time, go home, and learn to live with maybe. Thank you. Okay, I'm just gonna read one more poem because I know that there are some of you that want to also read, and maybe you might want to take a look at these photographs as well. Most of these are set in Pittsburgh, and they each have a little quote below them. So I invite you to take a look at those. Okay, so let me just end with this poem. Okay. It's called Impression. I breathe Pittsburgh, smell its smoke, inhale its soot. I swim its rivers and climb its steps. One day I'm halfway up in a peak of thought. What will I see when I reach the top? Light and giddy with altitude and attitude. Another day, I'm halfway down, the last leg of a journey, a finish line I dread crossing. I step down, my foot doesn't leave an impression in concrete, set for generations before me. The weight of this body is not to blame. My last breath may not be in Pittsburgh, but my ashes will swim the river as I once fluttered and floated, bathing myself in mother's milk. Thank you.
open up for questions and comments for Paula. I have a big mouth, so I'll probably talk a while. I gotta hear what other people have to say.
But I have a sense that the steel mills in general have a certain kind of similar character. I mean, I wasn't far from the steel mills in Baltimore. And
Oh, yes.
I live in Buffalo now, and many of my friends worked in the steel mills in Buffalo. And I have a sense that there's sort of a general character to steel mills all over the country, at least this country.
Well, and I bet you many of them were U.S. Steel, the same.
U.S. Bethlehem Steel.
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, in terms of what the pollution that they created or the working conditions of the workers.
My first night in Buffalo,
Uh-huh.
1971. I could look out the window and see the fire coming from the steel mill far on the other side of the town.
Right. Yes, absolutely. I know my sister and I, when I was just back home to visit her, she was talking about as a teenager, that was like the show
Yeah.
to watch that. It was, rather spectacular in its own way. And I think I would say, I mean, not that I know for a fact, but my guess would be there's a lot of commonality between, the Pittsburgh mills and those in Buffalo and other industrial towns. I'm sure that, there was pollution and workers who were unduly exposed to, toxins that might have been avoided. I know that I wrote an essay, I was telling George about this, about the Coke plant in Pittsburgh. And there was part of the study that I was talking about, remember about my grandfather and the cancer, they had done, a similar thing and found that the big red flag why Pittsburgh was always, or for many years, one of the sootiest cities in the country, like number one, was because of the Coke plant and the ovens leaked and workers on the top had the highest mortality rates because the fumes just went right up, I'm sure through their nose and so forth. So, and those were positions where African Americans were often placed. So you see how things worked. But at any rate, so that was a trouble spot and a reason why Pittsburgh was a sooty city. And the environmental groups would say, come on, how many years is it going to take for you to seal up these ovens and do what needs to be done? And it took far too long. And so I would say that, these kinds of conditions are, yes.
Well, it also it made me think of some of the nonchalance on like just hopelessness involved. I worked at Gunlock for a while, and they did the woodworking, but they would have to laminate, and if it was a thick laminate, because I remember walking through the shop, and all of a sudden, and I had never done it, but I'm breathing, and it just like burned my lungs.
Yes.
And I said, what is it? Well, it was like 3/4 inch, so they had to really do it for a lot. And all the workers are supposed to wear masks, but they refuse to wear them because they don't like the fact that it's hard to breathe.
Right.
And it's sort of like they're damaging their entire bodies.
Oh, absolutely. And that's a good point. I mean, some workers were like, I don't want to wear these, even though I know I should be. It's maybe a macho thing or what have you. And what can you do? I mean, but if there aren't any masks provided, that's another thing. But I know my sister worked in a plant and there were lots of toxins and ventilation was non-existent, and she spoke up and she paid for that. And I have to tell you, she has incredible lung problems now. So,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, back to Pittsburgh.
Mhm.
I was never familiar with the city at all until a couple of years ago. Our son and his wife bought a home just outside the city limits 2 years ago, and he became very familiar with the place quickly, and he's given us tours, and so I feel much more familiarized with that urban center now,
Mhm.
and I've learned quite a bit about it. I'm certainly not one to put a positive spin on big urban centers, but one thing I've noticed about Pittsburgh and what I learned is that, I mean, the steel industry per se has receded from
Absolutely.
its acme, from the, its
From the
peak,
heyday. Yeah, long gone.
and, I mean, there's still evidence there, no question about it, the bills are there, but so much has changed, apparently, in just the last decade or two, and it's just,
Mhm.
it's a changing face.
Yeah,
And
I couldn't agree with you more.
And I kind of appreciate some of the, not the service industry, but, there's some creativity involved in it.
Absolutely. And you're raising a good point. I'm talking about my father's generation, my grandfather's generation. Yes, and absolutely, things are much different today. And many people say absolutely for the better. These earlier generations were really hanging on to their livelihoods and were resistant, as we saw from some of the examples that I gave you. We don't have any whales here to save, so what do we need the environmental groups for? But the new generations, the technology, and now, what's the big company that's there now? I'm sorry, is it Google? I can't remember. But yeah, there's some very up and coming yuppies there that they can afford prices like when I saw what an apartment was renting for near these new places like Google or where Amazon, I can't even remember, but at any rate I was like, those are New York City prices, and yet these young people are paying them. And then there's people, of older generations that are making, maybe 1/3 of what they make, and they're kind of locked into the old economy, and so there is a disparity. But you're absolutely right, the younger generations are thriving, and there is quite a poetry scene there, and it's I love the city, I really do. My ashes are gonna be scattered there. I'm telling you, it's in my will. So, yes.
On a tastier spin, so of course Pittsburgh has like Permanis, Pierogies, Vitos, all of that, and the recently deceased Dirty O.
Yes, the dirty O no longer.
Do you write about the food scene around the city?
I'm not a big foodie person, but yeah, and it's obviously diversifying tremendously, because now, there are Thai restaurants and Vietnamese restaurants and Indian and this and that. I mean, there's any cuisine you want there now, right? So I, for one, am not a big foodie writer.
Vietnamese is the best though.
What's that?
The bubble tea, which I see you have bubble tea here.
I don't drink bubble tea, it's just, I think of, so my father was in Vietnam, but there was a wonderful Vietnamese place down in Falls Church, but to me, Vietnamese is just the freshest and
Yeah.
it's just above.
Can I ask where your son and his family moved to?
Just
Dormont, of course. So they can take the tea.
Yeah, one street down, he's in, so if he goes to the next street below him, he's in Pittsburgh.
Right, I understand how that works. But yeah, the transportation from the South Hills is one of the best, right? They can take the tea to get to.
On the subject of food,
Yes.
I was shocked when I went to Pittsburgh for the first time, which was like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, that there were French fries on the salads. I was like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
And pierogies like comes, yeah.
I know,
why
I
don't you
know.
throw fries?
I never
Vegetable
went for
oil,
that.
Yeah, vegetable oil, hot vegetable oil on the salad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was always
It
the
was
kid
great. It was
that,
great.
like there was maybe meat, potatoes, and peas, and I pushed them as far apart from each other as possible. So slapping it all together still isn't my thing. But it is a novelty, and Pittsburgh is known for it, so it's a gimmick that's really, it works.
Can we talk a little about the language of Pittsburgh?
Yeah.
I mean, anybody have anything to say about the language?
You think you'll learn something.
Yeah.
My daughter went to college there. She went down there in 2004.
What college?
And she went to the Art Institute of Pittsburgh.
Oh, great.
Right downtown there.
Yes.
And she's
Downtown, you mean?
DAHNTAHN. Right. And when I first went down there to visit her, I just couldn't get over how. As a matter of fact, I got pulled over one time, and the cop said, I only heard about yins. I never heard anybody actually say it, because everybody that we hung around down there was from here.
Right.
And he said it, and I couldn't help it. I busted out laughing. I thought I was going to get arrested or something.
Right.
I'm
Exactly.
sorry, but I never heard anybody really say that. Like, I thought it was a myth or something.
Well, it isn't. I know that when I was in New York, in Brooklyn, or New Jersey, somewhere, looking for an apartment, and, the owner showed me, and he was pointing to the closet, and he said, at there is the closet, and he opened it up, at air. And I said, you're from Pittsburgh, right? It was like a dead giveaway. So, yeah, I was just talking to George about what Pittsburghers call underwear,
There's
panties.
a reason for this.
Oh, what's the reason,
I
George?
know it's a great word.
Gutchies. Gutchies. If you look it up right now, you'll see it's a Western Pennsylvania
Does
word.
anybody know the derivation of this? We were trying to figure it out. We're like, gutchies. That's
Yeah,
like the worst word.
we
in the
didn't
world
have
for
Wi-Fi
women's
at the moment.
underwear.
Watch out if Kennywood is showing.
What's that?
Watch out if your Kennywood is showing.
Oh, if
I
you're
think
what?
your flies out.
You're what?
Right, yeah.
No, I know, but what's the word?
Kennywood. Your
Kennywood.
Your Kennywood is showing.
Wow.
And then there is the classic, sort of a jerky kind of person, a jagoff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's very, very Pittsburgh too. Yes, there's a whole vocabulary, instead of soda, soda, we say pop. Instead of rubber bands, we say gum bands. And yeah, there's a whole vocabulary. And nebby, you're a neb nose. And neb nose, that means somebody who's
In your shit. There you go.
in your face. Yeah.
Neb nose.
Yeah. And just, yeah.
The gossip.
A gossipy type of person who wants to get into your business.
I wonder what that's related to. It sounds like there's a Yiddish word, nevish. Like a nevish.
Yeah, maybe
someone goes
so.
to a plane with a nevish.
And I know at CMU, the fine institution in Pittsburgh that has a theater program, a drama program, they actually have somebody on faculty who can, Pittsburgh is one of the accents that if it's needed, it can be taught, just like, Cockney or something else. It's that distinctive.
Well, it's interesting because I never realized it. So I grew up, in Alexandria, Virginia. And my son had moved to Arlington and worked in the area. So he did some, observations, but he enjoyed moving because he said in the DC area, anytime you meet somebody at the bar or anywhere, it's like, so what do you do for a living? And it's just, that's but I've always
That's
thought.
American.
Huh?
That's American.
Well, he said it's much more in like the DC area, because it's sort of like what's your status? Should I
Yeah.
keep talking to you?
Right, yeah.
And I never thought of it that way, because I love asking people what they do for a living, but I just thought it was traditional.
Yeah, an icebreaker of sorts,
Yeah.
maybe to strike up a conversation.
But, so I'm thinking about all these little idiosyncrasies from the generations living in the areas,
Mm-hmm.
and all the immigrants and where they come from, and
Right, absolutely.
when people say nobody can drive in DC, and I said everybody driving in DC are from other parts of the country.
Yeah,
Do you know other unique elements of the city? I mean, not just the food stuff, but like the Pittsburgh chair, the Pittsburgh potty, the parking chair situation. All the bridges, it has more bridges than anywhere else.
yes, absolutely, the bridges,
Something like that.
absolutely. Pittsburgh what?
Potty.
Body?
Spell it.
The toilet in your basement.
Oh, potty, that word. Yeah, okay.
It goes back to the steelworkers and the coal miners who had to go through the basements first. So Pittsburgh houses will have a toilet in the basement because you go into the basement.
Yeah.
Yes, I hate to tell you this, but my house in Danville has a toilet, it has the scariest toilet in the country in the basement. And I think it's because a lot of these houses here, because there was a home on the hill and because it was a boomtown at one point, they had servants. Because there were a lot of servant doors in the kitchens of the old houses, and then there's a basement. Absolutely.
So documentaries about the phenomenon of this potty. That doesn't exclude the rest of the country.
Right, but yeah, when you come home from work, you have to take your clothes off and, exactly, it's a whole process. So you want it done in the basement or in the,
Yeah, so two things. One,
Yeah.
probably the most unbelievable sight I ever saw was coming up 79 from the south and coming into Pittsburgh.
Yeah, through the Fort Pitt Tunnel.
And then all of a sudden it's just like.
I know, isn't that fabulous?
You have 20 feet to go, 3 lanes.
Oh, yeah, exactly. If you can't pay too close attention to the scenery because exactly, you have to switch lanes quickly.
And when I did it, there was a Pittsburgh Steelers game, of course, and
Oh.
it was all backed up, and so I had a little time.
Yeah, good for you.
This is like, as a New Yorker, where everything's like on a grid in Manhattan, you can literally walk anywhere. And I was used to walking 10 miles a day when I lived in Manhattan. In Pittsburgh, that's a lot harder. There's a lot of barriers. There's a lot of like over the flat streets where you can't walk across.
Right.
And then half the city's over a river that way.
And you get to the end of the street, and that's just it.
Yeah, it's segmented. Yeah.
Is that different than you? Is it changed at all, or is it still?
No, I think, and just like we were saying, that the steps were really bridging, connecting those neighborhoods because they are sort of isolated, maybe they're, up on a hill or between, they're divided up a lot of the time, so.
Did they have those inclines way back then?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, yes, and there's this story that goes around that, the steps were of course for free, right? You could climb the steps up and down, or you could pay to take the incline. And of course, the workers were, inclined to take the steps because they were free. So the story goes that the incline companies kind of hired some goons to go under the steps and make it believe that they were haunted so that the workers would not take the steps and pay to take the incline.
Oh my God. And the one incline is actually right next to the oldest U.S. broadcast, WQED, or I'm getting the letters wrong, but the oldest broadcast in the United States, the oldest radio broadcast in Pittsburgh.
Is that the one that's near the Iron City Beer sign up there, the hill?
No, it's on Carson Street by the incline near the West End Bridge.
Right, there's a couple right along there, right? The Duquesne and I don't remember the other one.
Station Square.
So Positively Pittsburgh is a very entertaining website. So you were talking about wearing the underwear.
Oh, okay, so what do they say? Do tell.
They got 2 paragraphs and then the American translation.
Yeah, we're all eager to hear this, I am. Yeah, we gotta know, where does gut cheese come from?
Well, that's what's inside.
Watch the videos of Pittsburgh Dad.
So listen, Yins, to the story. Last Monday, when I got home from downtown Pittsburgh, I readied up the house, washed the clothes, and did the orning knot. Maybe somebody can translate. Then I decided to take a break because I was getting really hungry. I looked in a fridge, but it needed stock. All I had was butter bread and leftover city chicken. No jumbo, I chipped ham, no kielbasi. So I headed out to the store. I got me a buggy and picked up a hoagie, some pop, and a dozen eggs in case I wanted dippy ones in the morning. What's a dippy? Dipped egg. When I got back home, I headed out to set by the creek to eat in peace and quiet. Just as I was gonna take a bite on my sandwich, my nebby neighbor, Cheryl, shows up wanting to know how I been. Whilst we chatting, I see a grinny sneak up and start nibbling on my mill. I tried to chase him, but the grass was slippy and I fell into the jagger bushes or yager bushes. I had never been so frustrated.
Can I say that?
So you want me to translate?
That is great.
So that's
We're positively Pittsburgh.
Well, we still have no gut cheese.
Yeah,
Yeah, let's
we
see
gotta
that.
find the gut cheese.
Yeah.
They said it just sort of comes from the Eastern Europeans.
Yeah,
Northern
that's what I'm
Europeans.
saying.
It does sound a little Polish or
Yeah.
Hungarian,
Yeah.
right?
All are believed to have come from the Eastern Europeans. It's possible the merging of various languages in the area caused the morph and slur in the pronunciation of words.
Somebody said it came from their grandma.
Who knows?
Pretty sure it
It
came
does
from my
sound
grandma.
like something grandma would say, let's face it.
You still said, get your gut cheese on.
Get your gut cheese on.
Then somebody said Polish for underwear.
It's a city of
Yeah.
melting
Polish. So, I feel like the plane is.
I know,
It is.
Paula,
Yes.
do you have anything else you wanna add, close on about? Great city?
I don't know, I think we should end with gut cheese.
Okay, I'm gonna bring it, next time I go to a game in Pittsburgh, like a Pirates game or Steelers game, I'm just gonna yell gut cheese, see what happens.
See what happens, right, you might have something flung at you.
Or
Right,
gut
French
cheese.
fries.
French fries.
You have to just only take 10 minutes.
So we keep going to the Phillies Blue Jays games. And
Oh,
my son wears his Blue Jays hat and his Phillies t-shirt.
that's a bad idea to wear anything other than
Not
than a
Phillies,
Philadelphia.
Pittsburgh.
Oh,
Pittsburgh,
Pittsburgh.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
that's
Pittsburgh.
okay.
This is Pittsburgh.
Philly is not okay.
Right up to that.
That's fine.
It's not
Pittsburgh is-
Philadelphia.
And somebody's asking him, and he said, well, since I was 6 years old, I was a Blue Jays fan, but now I'm living here, so I have to wear them both.
I was a Pirates fan for no reason when I was like 10 years old. So
For no
it's always been kind of.
I went to the first Orioles game in Baltimore.
The first
My
one.
mother took me. I fell asleep. She never took me to another game.
Oops.
Sounds good. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for the conversation afterwards, I enjoyed it. I'm so glad you You found out.
Translation. So we'll take like a couple minute break in case you want to grab a coffee, in case you use the bathroom, and then we'll come back.
Yeah.
Thanks. All right.
My mother said.
Is it Paula? I don't remember to tell you that.
You were talking about the soda.
I found this one.
Oh,
And,
you know, my
my
dad's
grandfather,
his relative.
they owned, his great grandfather owned
Yeah.
a piano place.
It was
They
still,
tuned pianos, they
shocking.
repaired pianos, they built, I don't know what they did, but
first of all, the fact that
my
it was
dad's
pronounced
dad owned a
Kovacs.
piano.
I was like,